North Korea is one of the most isolated countries in the world, under a strict regime. The military has total control, and everyone lives under constant pressure. They have 13 million active soldiers, 58 million in paramilitary groups, and 200,000 in reserves. It's the largest military in the world. People have no freedom, just rules, rules, and more rules. Even the officials have it tough when celebrations end. The reality behind the military is brutal. Everything you've been told, it's all a lie. The country's history is made up. Those heroes, they were actually villains. It sounds like fiction, but it's North Korea's crazy reality. People grow up in terrible conditions, constantly brainwashed, believing their country is the happiest place on earth. Even when they leave, that control stays with them. North Koreans can't travel. They can't talk to foreigners. No internet, no international calls. If they need to make a call, they need approval from 5 different departments, and the whole call is monitored. Wearing jeans is banned, clothes with English or Korean writing. Not allowed. If they break the rules, they face harsh punishment. Every house has to display a portrait of the leader. It's not optional. The portraits must always be clean. Officials can show up anytime to check. If there's even a speck of dust, the whole family gets punished. Every morning people pray to Kim Il-sung. The regime rewrote religious texts, turning Kim into a god. They say he could walk on rainbows, turn pine cones into weapons, and change sand into rice. They even say he could cross rivers by walking on leaves. They call Kim Il-sung a god, and Kim Jong-il his son. They claim Kim Il-sung wasn't born in a humble place, but in a special log cabin. In reality, he was born elsewhere. But they say his birth was marked by stars and rainbows.
And everything you learned was lie. And your country's history was so fabricated, and everyone around you was so brainwashed. And the heroes you worship were actually monstrous villains. This is like the plot to a science fiction novel, but it's the insane reality for North Koreans like me.
Foreigners are watched closely. Everything they bring is inspected. Their schedule and meals are all planned out. No changes allowed. If they try to go anywhere alone, guards stop them. When you walk in, you'll see portraits of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. They are the faces of the regime, and while dictator is a harsh word, it's hard to deny it fits them perfectly. After the armistice between North and South Korea in 1953, Kim Il-sung became North Korea's leader. He ruled for 41 years, and when he died, his son Kim Jong-il took over. In 2011, Kim Jong-il passed away, and his son Kim Jong-un took control. North Korea's isolation has kept the outside world in the dark about life there. Many try to learn the truth by visiting as tourists, but they usually end up with nothing. Tourists are tightly controlled with their belongings logged and every photo checked before they leave. If there's any issue, their gear is taken and everything's deleted. The most common sight in North Korea is the Kim family's statues and pictures. They're always smiling, always making powerful gestures, but the truth about how people really live is clear from what's left unsaid. The Kim family promised for 3 generations that people would eat white rice and pork soup, but as of 2024, fewer than 20% of families get white rice. Most people eat corn crushed up with the husk and germ still in it. Some better-off families might eat corn noodles. Corn noodles puff up when boiled, which helps stretch the food supply, but they're often full of sand, dust and corn husks, making them tough to eat. Some people can't even afford corn, so they go door to door asking for leftover corn water. They collect it in a big barrel and, after hours, they pour off the top, leaving the gritty stuff at the bottom to cook into porridge. Even when people are starving, the government still demands that they hand over their waste to use as fertilizer. This rule has been in place since the famine years and continues in 2024. North Korean toilets are a wooden structure with a hole and a big barrel underneath. If someone doesn't comply, officials will intervene, so people with empty stomachs who can't go end up stealing others' waste. Kimchi is a staple in every North Korean home, and the color of the kimchi tells you how well off the family is. Making kimchi requires 10 pounds of fresh chili peppers to make just 1 pound of chili powder, so peppers are expensive. The darker the kimchi, the more chili it contains, which means the family is wealthier. Many elderly people in poor families, who may not survive the hunger, finally speak out before they die. Back when the Japanese were in charge, we could still eat rice, but now we can't even fill up on coarse grains. Some brave students, unafraid of the consequences, rewrote the lyrics to the Happy song. The original lyrics said, "In the free land, we grow up happy. There's nothing we envy," but the students changed it to, "In the land of dictatorship, We eat corn and invite our grandparents to join us. There's so much in the world we wish we had. Many foreigners wonder how North screens are live like human robots, why they are not casting out the regime.
Many foreigners wonder how North Koreans are live like human robots, why they are not questioning the regime, why they are not overthrow the regime. But I believe every person, if born in North Korea, will be exactly like us. Because we don't know another life existed besides we have.
We were captured in a huge virtual prison.
On the streets of Pyongyang, the most noticeable thing is the electric buses, but the line of them is a bit much from another angle. The people here don't have to deal with traffic. You hardly ever see cars on the highways. Next, we followed the tour group to a key spot, the joint security area between North and South Korea. There are 100 soldiers stationed here since the 1953 armistice. Both sides pulled back 2 kilometers from the military boundary. This 4-kilometer area is a no-man's land, a buffer zone. Only soldiers can carry light gear. Neither side can cross the line. If they do, cameras will catch it and shots will be fired after deleting a bunch of photos. The tour group moved on to the military museum. Before entering, something small happened. An elderly woman was cleaning up trash. But staff quickly forced her to leave because she messed up the carefully set scene. It's clear. The harder they try to stage things, the more real it feels. The guide then showed a North Korean documentary. It talked about World War II. The West made tons of money selling weapons. But after the war, they lost that income, which led to a huge economic crisis. So the West launched the Korean War to grab more profits. But in reality, North Korea fired the first shot. If North Korea hadn't used force, the situation might have been much calmer. Many North Koreans fled to South Korea to survive, but they were called traitors by their own country. They just wanted to eat. I also found an audio recording online, a real phone call between an escapee and their family.
엄마 이렇게 힘들게 번더노 어찌겠어가 내 돈 받았습니다. 6,000원 받았습니다. 예, 어머니도 알지 않은지 모르겠습니다. 예, 정말 진짜 엄마 보기 싶어 죽겠습니다. 엄마 알지도 않은지 정말 이렇게 있어서 엄마 전화상을 말도 못하고 있어서 이렇게 말하기 나도 막 안타까운 정도 아닙니다. 엄마. 어제 뭐 엄마 목소리 듣겠지 정말 어제는 뭐 엄마 목소리도 들을 것 같지도 못하고 야 이게 정말 사는 것도 힘들고 있지 않습니까 어머니. 오빠랑 사는 게 힘듭니다 어머니. 다 갔습니다. 집안 식구들 다 사는 게 갔습니다.
Darka Sida, the giant grassman near the western hill made Kasada feel really sad the first time he heard the recording. In the face of history, ordinary people are so helpless. After the North Korean documentary ended, the room was filled with an awkward silence. When tourists questioned whether the event was real, the guide couldn't say much. It was during the war, 1950 to 53. Okay, so there's no precise date, just during the conflict as a whole. The tourist didn't ask any more questions, and his friends laughed at him. He quietly admitted he was scared. But sometimes the need to know overpowers fear. When the guide showed them the hero ship, someone asked a tough question. They wanted to know if the ship had recently sunk a South Korean vessel. The guide froze. Not long ago, a South Korean ship sank off the coast of Pyongyang, and all 46 crew members died. The question caused the tour to stop immediately. They were taken into a small room, and no one knows exactly what happened next. After hours of questioning, the tourists learned a big lesson. Never ask sensitive questions in places like this. A place that lies to its own people can't be trusted to tell the truth to outsiders. Once things calmed down, the tour guide continued, and everything went back to normal. On the way back to the hotel, people were still lined up waiting for buses. A woman was picking up trash from the road because a traffic accident had just happened, and she had to clean it up right away. In North Korea, there are almost no billboards. What you see are posters of soldiers glorifying their selfless spirit. This is how they turn people into machines. Speaking of selflessness, you can't ignore North Korea's claim of free healthcare. But what's really going on with that? They did set up free healthcare, but it's not sustainable. Since the 90s, they've had a shortage of imported medicines. By the year 2000, hospitals were almost out of drugs. The process to see a doctor is simple. You go to the hospital, get a prescription, then buy the medicine from a pharmacy and bring it back for the doctor to administer for free for minor illnesses. People just tough it out for serious problems. You have to go to a top hospital, but even there they don't have medicine. The syringes and surgical tools are reused after boiling. What's surprising is there are always hospital beds available. No need to fight for one, even though you pay for medicine, beds, and surgeries are free. So why don't more people go to the hospital? It's because the cost of getting to a major hospital is too much for most people. If you get seriously ill outside Pyongyang, you're out of luck. There are no ambulances in small towns, and many people don't even have phones. So for most people, it's either no treatment for minor problems or no money for serious ones. Even if you do spend the money, it still might not help. So what's the point of free healthcare? Back at the hotel, the tourists felt uneasy without internet, but it wasn't just their problem. The whole country has limited internet access. Only the top leaders and their inner circle can use it. Ordinary people can't see the outside world. They just live in North Korea paying. Their loyalty to the generals. Mornings in Pyongyang are quiet yet noisy. Quiet because the streets are empty. Noisy because traffic police are still directing traffic. There are no cars, but they're still waving their arms. This shows just how obsessed they are with appearances. The next stop was to take photos in front of Kim Il-sung's statue, even though the tourists didn't want to pose with the dictator. It was part of the routine, so they had to do it.
We stop here, but first we'll put the flowers down and then come back. So go and place your bouquets, the three of you. We bow. 1, 2, 3.
After the tourists left, locals started flooding in. The cleaners were working non-stop. It's a Monday ritual here. You can see how much Kim Il-sung is revered. At lunch, the tourists headed to the country's only pizza place. Only the elite and a few foreign tourists can afford to eat there. This place exists because Kim Jong-il loved pizza. Even though North Korea and the West don't get along, Kim Jong-il always claimed he ate pizza with a critical purpose. It's honestly laughable when you think about it. After pizza, the tourists went to a special welcome ceremony. Everyone was laughing and interacting, but those smiles looked a little forced. Behind the rehearsed smiles, there's a hidden sadness nobody talks about. The last part of the ceremony was a small performance. The performers had different talents, but no matter what they did, something felt off. Especially their smiles, which made it seem like they owed the country a huge debt from birth. That smile is actually their way of showing gratitude, and they can't think otherwise. It's not just during performances. People rehearse songs, praising Kim Jong-un all the time. You can tell if the lyrics are sincere by looking at their faces. After the performance, the tourists were taken to a heavily guarded place, Mount Paektu, where Kim Jong-il was born. The guide mentioned that he started a guerrilla army in 1950. Catch their conversation. Finally, the tourists visited a local's house. A photo of the woman with the leader was hanging on the wall, clearly showing she was part of the regime's elite boredom set. So the tourists slipped away to the beach through the women picking seaweed. They finally saw a glimpse of the real North Korea. In North Korea, locals are forbidden from talking to foreign tourists. If anyone is caught and reported, their entire family could face punishment. North Korea doesn't want people talking because they need their people as labor, and they don't want anyone sharing the dark past. During the Arduous March, food supplies were cut off and people starved, while the Kim family and their inner circle lived luxuriously. How did the survivors make it through? What did they eat during the food shortage? The Arduous March started after Kim Il-sung's death in 1994, which led to rations being cut until they were completely stopped by the end of 1995. By 1996, clean water was a luxury for most people. Anyone who lived through that time knows the famine was real. So how did the survivors get by? I found some answers from people who went through it. One thing they ate was corn stalks ground into powder, mixed with corn to make noodles. They also made rough food with corn and tree bark. If they couldn't even get that, they'd dig up dirt, shape it into noodles, and boil it to eat. The boiling was just to keep the dirt from turning into mud soup. By the end of the Arduous March, North Korea loosened some trade restrictions. People emptied their savings to buy a pig to raise, but without any feed. They had to feed the pigs their own waste. Some families even used the same pot to cook both pig food and human food. They'd cook the pig's food at the bottom and their own food on top. It's disgusting, but when you're starving, it's what you had to do. Only those who could afford a pig had to deal with this, for those who had to sell their floorboards just to get a meal. Things were even worse. A family would eat their last meal on the cold cement floor, then sit in their empty home. A few days later, they'd pass away one by one. Many North Korean defectors say they didn't even want to face their homeland when they used the bathroom. Even now, people in North Korea say, "I just wish I could have enough rice to eat even if it's only once." The people from the Arduous March period felt the same way. Their only thought was they'd never had enough rice in their life. Would they die without ever getting their fill? When tourists tried talking to locals, the guards caught them quickly and separated them. Civilians were forbidden from saying anything to foreigners. But you could tell the guards were frustrated too. They showed just how terrifying this place could be. One guard said, "I don't have permission. I can't let you go forward, and if something happens, I can't help you." The tourists had no choice but to leave quietly. A tour should have been free, but besides the designated routes, nothing else was open to visitors. At every stop, staff blocked their way. Through the experiences of French tourists, we get a clear picture of the country's problems. One thing's for sure. The North Korean government doesn't want its people to wake up. The policies, like with fishermen, have both ups and downs. For dictators, it's easier to control the country if it's isolated. If you teach kids from the start that the Kim family are superhumans, they'll grow up believing it. Even when they realize later that superpowers are made up, they'll still believe. The Kims were sent by heaven to save the world. But does the Kim family really want to cut off the world? Not really. In 2014, a Russian documentary filmmaker was invited to North Korea. They were told they could film freely, but everything had to be reviewed afterward. The filming went smoothly, but the director had a trick up his sleeve. He slipped outtakes into the final cut, and when it leaked, it had everyone laughing. North Korea thought the director was there to promote the regimes. So they used it as an opportunity to hype themselves up, but after the shoot, the cameras didn't stop. The actors changed positions, filming from day to night. Their changing expressions told a story. This contrast turned into a brutal satire. The more North Korea tried to make itself look good, the more it backfired. Besides that, almost every scene in the film is staged. What you see on screen is all carefully set up by the North Korean government. Take the scene with workers entering the factory. Their spots are pre-arranged. They only walk in after filming starts. The documentary focuses on a North Korean worker's family, and the government wants to show how great life is for the people. But no matter how much they try to make it look perfect, a lie is still a lie. Once the truth comes out, it just gets awkward. The father in this family was originally a reporter, but the North Koreans decided to make him a model engineer at a textile factory. All right, everyone do your work, just like they did, just like before. His mum really loves this. As soon as the engineer steps in, the problem magically disappears. This setup makes viewers think their sewing skills are world-class, way ahead of everyone else. The mother in the family was a cafeteria worker, but in the story, she's suddenly a model worker at a soy milk factory, with the factory all organized. Clean uniforms, and the director's guidance, everyone falls into character. But what they don't know is the camera had already started rolling 10 minutes earlier. After the soy milk factory talk, the factory manager jumps in to praise the leader. The Kim Jong-il flower won first place at the flower show, and my district leader father's essay won first place in the competition. It's all nonsense. What does a flower show have to do with a soy milk factory? In the end, it's just the scriptwriters trying to show respect to the Kim family. In North Korea, whether you're an actor or not, if the camera's on you, you've got to act like a pro. This veteran wearing a bulletproof vest is telling kids about his heroics. He talks about fighting Western forces in the 1950s, but that's not the point. What matters is, when enemy planes showed up, a shining figure appeared on the battlefield. This light cleared the smoke, but as soon as it cleared, 32 enemy planes started bombing. At that moment, the leader's brain was working overtime. He realized the enemy was scared, thinking, if I take down one, the rest will run. So this great leader picked up his rifle and shot at the sky. Sure enough, when he shot down one plane, the other 31 quickly turned tail and ran. That great leader was North Korea's Marshal Kim Il-sung. But after telling the story, the audience started dozing off. After some forced applause, the veteran suddenly forgot his lines. It got super awkward. The plane story had been rehearsed over and over. The young people were falling asleep. The veteran's back was aching from standing clearly. No one cared about these made-up stories. This shows the fake reality of the entire country, from top to bottom. Every time the camera enters a home, the TV always shows Kim Jong-un's face. In 2011, Kim Jong-il's death sent shockwaves around the world. Everyone turned their focus to his son, Kim Jong-un. No one knew what this 28-year-old would do, or what kind of impact he'd have in North Korea and beyond. In 2013, a German guy named Philip decided to visit Pyongyang as a tourist. Before going, he signed a statement saying his visit wasn't for promotional purposes. North Korean officials told him he could take pictures, but they'd need to be approved. First, Philip had a backup plan using his camera's video feature to secretly capture everything North Korea didn't want filmed. When Philip landed in Pyongyang, it was July 27th, the day the armistice between North and South Korea was signed. This day is called Victory Day in North Korea. That day lots of international tourists showed up for the military parade, so getting photos wasn't too hard. The parade didn't just last one day, but went on for a full week. Philip felt like he had come at just the right time, but not long after, he started running into some uncomfortable moments. He noticed that he had to be really careful talking to his guide. The guide wasn't just watching him, but also keeping an eye on another guide. It seemed like if anyone made a slip-up, it had been noted down and reported to higher-ups. This kind of mutual surveillance happens a lot in North Korea, and it's pretty intense. As a result, even among themselves, many North Koreans are too scared to speak their true thoughts. Eventually, people just stop thinking for themselves. In North Korea, the Kim family's personality cult is everywhere. Tourists might forget the places they visited, but they'll never forget the smiles of Kim Jong-il and his son. Across from the Taedong River, there's the giant Mansudi Memorial built in April 1972. Standing 170 meters tall, it was built for Kim Il-sung's 60th birthday. After Philip bowed, he didn't leave right away. He stayed a bit longer and noticed that the fake flowers he'd placed were being taken by an old woman. Philip followed her and found out the flowers were being collected to be resold at the stand. He couldn't help but think, that's one heck of a business idea. In the city center, there's Kim Il-sung Square in Pyongyang, spanning 75,000 square meters, all paved with granite. It's mainly used for military parades. Before the parades, workers mark tiny white dots and numbers to tell the participants where to stand and what to do. The North Korean History Museum is the most religious place in the country, packed with stories about the Kim family's struggles, even though their authenticity is questionable. No matter where you go, there's always some form of worship for the Kim father and son. Ironically, the Kims seem to have become more than just leaders. They've turned into gods who control all of North Korea. At night, Philip watched the Arirang Festival at the Mayday Stadium in Pyongyang, the world's largest sports stadium, holding up to 150,000 people. The performances always follow the same script, showing off North Korea's history achievements and the Kim family's glorious deeds. These shows create the illusion that the people of North Korea are lucky to be living in that country. People's desire for freedom never dies. Even if it means risking everything, some will always try to escape. In recent years, North Korea has strengthened its border control. They've made the watchtowers taller so the guards can spot anyone from farther away. The North Korean government believes showing people the outside world or letting outsiders see what's really happening inside North Korea is the worst kind of betrayal. Kim Jong-un ordered that any soldier who catches a defector gets a reward and time off. When someone escapes North Korea, the first stop is always China. Then they go through Laos and Vietnam. And finally, they reach South Korea, since ordinary North Koreans can't connect to the outside world because of strict communication controls. They rely on middlemen to make contact. Locals call these middlemen snakeheads. Lee Soo-yeon, who escaped North Korea years ago, is now living in South Korea. She contacted a snakehead to help get her son out of North Korea. But soon she got the bad news. Her son had been caught by the authorities. Once arrested by them, it's almost a life sentence. Many would rather face execution than get caught leaving family behind in North Korea and starting a new life in South Korea. Weighs heavily on the heart. This man feels the same. Guilt. Recently he found out his family was about to be exiled, so they had to start fleeing again. Even with help from a snakehead, the journey is still dangerous. The truth is, besides those with family in South Korea, one really cares about the defectors. The snakeheads treat them like cargo. The family's escape route takes them across China, then to Vietnam. After days of traveling, they finally arrived at a safe house in Vietnam. Though it was a simple rural area, it left a strong impact on them. Fetching water took all day. If there were any meetings or activities, they would be thirsty all day long after resting for a few days. They planned to move on to Laos. While crossing through the jungle, they kept their flashlights low to avoid being spotted. After hours of trekking, they finally reached Laos. Then they had to cross into Thailand. These countries have close ties with North Korea, so if they get caught, they could be sent back, and all their efforts would be for nothing. When they finally reached another safe house, they could breathe a little easier. They even carried pills for the journey, preferring to risk death than be sent back to North Korea. After their last night of rest, the family, led by their guide, crossed the Mekong River and made their way to freedom. Eventually, they reached Seoul, South Korea, where they received a modern education and started blending into society. The South Korean government gave them a home. The first time they were treated like real people. A few months later, the director contacted them again. You could see how much their spirits had lifted. This is what it really looks like when regular people escape North Korea. The lie of their so-called utopia crumbles when you see the truth. In the real world, there's enough food and happiness, while North Korea's so-called paradise is nothing but trash and filth. At the heart of it all, North Korea's struggles are because of the Kim family. When they set up a dictatorship, with one person controlling everything, there was no hope for the country. Kim Il-sung always thought that North Korea's greatness would come from breaking free from outside control, which led to his Juche ideology. To make this work, he put the whole country under his rule, refusing any foreign influence. This meant North Korea had to produce everything themselves, including food. But with poor land and tough weather, they could never be self-sufficient in food, facing both agricultural and industrial problems. Kim Il-sung rolled out a big mobilization plan, pushing workers to do more than ever to fill the gap if anyone complained about the insane workload. They were harshly punished in the 70s as the Cold War eased. Western countries became more open to lending money. But North Korea didn't cut back on military spending. They borrowed $80 million from France for a fertilizer plant, $160 million from the UK for a cement factory, and $400 million from Japan for heavy machinery. But when they couldn't pay back these loans, they just decided to never repay them. By 1976, North Korea was totally isolated. Meanwhile, South Korea was booming with the miracle on the Han River. If North Koreans saw how much their neighbors' lives were improving, it would cause serious problems. So instead of trying to fix their economy, North Korea took a different route. It wasn't until the 1990s that Kim Jong-il abandoned his father's Juche ideology and started to improve relations with other countries. From 1994 to 1999, North Korea agreed to halt its nuclear program and stop missile tests. In 2000, Kim Jong-il met with South Korea's leader, and relations with the outside world started to improve. But soon North Korea realized that better relations didn't mean economic help. Investors weren't willing to take risks in a country with unpredictable laws. The Kim family could change the rules anytime, and they could take your factory without warning. So not long after, North Korea's relationships with the world went downhill again. What many don't realize is that North Korea is the third largest exporter of illegal goods. Some international criminals took refuge there, working in underground arms deals. The profits from these businesses were huge, and they helped fund North Korea's massive military, while the Kim family enjoyed new luxury cars. As for the people, the Kim family kept promising them a better life, getting them to stay grateful. They just hoped that one day life wouldn't feel like a mountain on their backs, and that their simple wish for enough food to eat could finally come true.